Nigeria shut its land borders last August, claiming the move was aimed at stopping the smuggling of rice to neighboring states where it sells for more. The closure was also aimed at halting illegal arms trade. Nigeria's oil is also reportedly illegally smuggled into neighboring states, especially Benin, leading to loss of millions of dollars. In today's program, we are also discussing about Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of Angola's former president, who built an empire through exploiting her country and corruption. I'm your host, Mubarak Kenya. Stay with us.
Nigeria border closure. Nigeria closed its land borders just 3 months after it had signed the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Once fully implemented, the agreement is poised to create the world's largest free trade area. However, this nascent agreement suffered its most major blow after Nigeria's decision to shut its land borders.
Now, to further analyze the implications of Nigeria's controversial decision, we contacted Baba Aye, a contributing editor of the Review of African Political Economy. Thanks a lot for joining us, Mr. Aye. Why did the Nigerian government close its land borders without prior warning to neighboring countries?
In the view of the government, this was undermining production, agricultural, industrial production, with a focus on rice, as I said earlier. And also, I mean, this particular part was more related to his view for the semi-border with Benin to the southwest of the country. Then to the north, there was the proposition that it was quite porous and had been one of the ways and manners. In fact, some would say, in their view, the main way and manner in which Boko Haram
The border closure by Nigeria is seen as a major setback to integration efforts. It is also a pointer that some major African countries are unprepared for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Niger, Chad, Mali, and Burkina Faso are all landlocked countries that need Nigeria's ports for trade. Members of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, last February met in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, in a fresh move to find a solution to Nigeria's continued closure of its borders to curb smuggling. ECOWAS members are unanimous in rejecting Nigeria's unilateral decision to shut its borders.
On the issue of border closure between Nigeria and Benin, and between Niger and Nigeria, I had already condemned on behalf of Parliament on the occasion of the opening session of the second extraordinary session, which held in Monrovia last September.
The closure has also hurt Nigerian businesses, including cement exports, and hiked inflation. For instance, Dangote Cement says that exports fell by 41% in 2019 following the border closure. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, meanwhile, claims that the partial closure was not to punish neighboring countries, but to strengthen the country's security and economy. He claims that the closure has drastically reduced the smuggling of agricultural produce, as well as arms and ammunition. Now, how has the border closure impacted on the Nigerian economy?
The federal government of Nigeria has, and particularly under the current government, has a history of lies, particularly regarding production figures. The other time, it claimed to have beating the tie to production of rice, or coming close second, and this was debunked. So beyond these claims, what Nigerians do is that the price of rice has not gone down. Rather, you have had even rebagging of some of the locally produced rice as foreign rice, so to speak.
A According to estimates, the informal sector throughout West Africa, and particularly in Benin, represents approximately 50% of GDP and actually 70% in Benin. This informal sector also represents 90% of employment. Therefore, informal activities along the borders are crucial for the survival of many poor people in West Africa.
Meanwhile, Poultry Association of Nigeria states that annual demand for the poultry value chain is over 500 billion naira, with 165 million birds, 650,000 metric tons of eggs, and 290,000 metric tons of meat demanded annually. Of this, local production is only addressing 30%, while the rest, which is 70%, is imported.
The closure of the border really affects the prices of the goods nowadays. Because we thought when the border was closed, everything will be at cheaper rates now, but it's not as so.
Those small markets and the small business here in our communities has been collapsed, especially on that stopping transportation of fuel 20 kilometers to the border side. When you see that, the tailoring, welders.
Nigeria has also been urged to exercise tighter control of its borders. The Buhari government is facing pressure to deal with corruption among its security agencies, particularly customs and immigration, to prevent illegal border crossings and smuggling.
Despite proclaimed war on corruption, why is Nigeria perceived by Nigerians and the international community still as very corrupt? The government of Nigeria claims winning the war on corruption. But is this statement backed by evidence?
Do you think the Nigerian government has been unable to effectively control its borders due to poor management and corruption, and has thus resorted to border closure?
There's a lot of corruption with regards to the system in the border. The customs people realize that, look, even the rulers are corrupt. Everybody is out for his own or our own, and corruption becomes an industry, and it thrives across the border because you have there's room for it there, but you can't separate the corruption at the border from the broader corruption that has become an endemic aspect of governance. In fact, a governance industry by the Nigerian bosses.
The border closure was also supposed to stop arms reaching Boko Haram Takfiri terrorists. However, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari claimed in January that he is baffled by the resurgence of the terrorist group, which has increased attacks against civilian and military establishments. The Nigerian government says one of the objectives of the border closure was to stem cross-border weapon smuggling. However, attacks by the Boko Haram terrorists have increased over the last few months. Why is this so?
Boko Haram insurgency's roots go beyond the issue of arms proliferation from across the borders. And a number of people have argued that Boko Haram receives support from sections of the ruling class in Nigeria. You have had reports of weapons being dropped, and also it's not even only weapons. I mean, foods, daily necessities of the Boko Haram insurgents.
Now in this section of our program, my colleague Sheila Nelima will be presenting you with news and events from across Africa. What do you have today, Sheila?
Thank you, Henia. Hello and welcome to this part of the program. It's Sheila Nelima bringing you news from around Africa. In the spirit of bridging the gender gap, the World Health Organization, Africa Region, and the United Nations Volunteers Program partnered to recruit early to middle career women across 47 African countries. The initiative seeks to hire 100 women in health-related fields to improve the health and well-being of people in Africa. The initiative is in line with this year's International Women's Day theme, I Am Generation Equality. In other news, the Ethiopian government has released a statement shedding light on the reason for not cooperating with the Egyptian counterparts in the Nile Dam dispute. They stated external interference and unwarranted pressure. The Ethiopian Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy stated that the United States was invited as an observer, later acted as a mediator, and then suddenly drafted an agreement. They termed this as totally unacceptable and announced the intention of proceeding with their Nile Dam plans as earlier scheduled. On to a trendsetter for sustaining Mother Nature. A forest ecologist, Dr. Alemayu Wasie, is working with church forests in Ethiopia to preserve the native forests that have suffered deforestation over the years. In a study carried out 10 years ago, the doctor discovered that the only places where forests survived were directly related with the church structures. This is due to the beliefs that the church should mirror the Garden of Eden, together with a legend that hermits live in the forest, occasionally coming out to pray for the community. He thus began an initiative of educating the communities on how to not only preserve the forests around the church, but expand them. Still on the same topic, in an effort to tackle climate change, Egypt plans to expand mangrove forests along the Red Sea. The government explained that mangrove forests are critical for bees, which as a pollinator would support the growth of trees, flowers and other plants, improving the ecosystem. The government also seeks to provide job opportunities, expanding areas of scientific research while achieving the sustainable development. Now, in the field of economics, Angola has increased the numbers of companies to be privatized from 74 to 195. The project is to be completed by 2022 and includes companies in the oil, mining, ICT and telecommunication, agriculture, transport and tourism industries. The government stated that the revenues accrued will help develop the economy and take the country back to its former glory. Now, speaking of former glories, the Djoser Pyramid of Egypt is now open for the public. The restoration project has been ongoing since 2006. The world's oldest pyramid was built as the final resting place of the pharaoh Djoser, commemorating him, his son and grandson. It underwent refurbishment on its exterior as well as the internal corridors, restoring its structure and had been damaged by a previous earthquake. Let's have a look.
السادة السفراء فقط لو سمحتوا صورة تذكارية مع دولة رئيس الوزراء ومع معالي الوزير.
Now we have come to the end of this part. Visit our social media pages on Twitter and Instagram and interact with us. Share your views and comments on the program. Stay tuned. We will be back soon.
U.S. complicity in Angola corruption.
Angola, one of the poorest countries in the world, is home to Africa's richest woman. Isabel dos Santos, the daughter of Angola's former president, built an empire through exploiting her own country and corruption. She was able to loot her poor country through assistance by companies and financial institutions based in Western Europe and the United States.
According to estimates, Isabel dos Santos is worth an estimated $2 billion. The empire she built stretches from Hong Kong to the United States, comprising over 400 companies and subsidiaries.
Isabel dos Santos' business background is her father's presidential decrees and her father's power. You had always the state providing the financial cover and the political cover for her.
Despite its booming oil industry, poverty in Angola is a serious problem. Angola is an oil-rich country but badly affected by corruption, which has resulted in grinding poverty across the country. According to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, dos Santos used Western advisors to loot Angola.
Swathe of service providers, the bankers, the lawyers, the oil companies, the consultants have allowed the extraction of the resources that belong to the Angolan people from their country into Western capitals where this money gets reinvested.
To discuss this issue further, we spoke with Alexander Powers, an African affairs analyst. Thanks, Mr. Powers, for joining us. Are you surprised that Isabel dos Santos was able to amass such a massive fortune during her father's reign over the oil-rich African country for over 38 years?
You know, if you want to do business at the highest levels, or you wanted to back in the day, you had to work with the Dos Santos family. So I think this is just the beginning of whether or not they want to open up corruption charges into other family members, because it's not just her. There's the rest of the family. And if you wanted access in Angola, you had to go through Dos Santos.
According to Luanda Leaks project manager at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, Isabel dos Santos took advantage of U.S. secrecy jurisdiction to plunder her country's wealth. The Luanda Leaks documents show that dos Santos used a Delaware company to buy property in Portugal. Delaware is one of the easiest places to create a low-tax secretive company. According to a new report from the Tax Justice Network, the United States is the world's most complicit country in helping individuals hide money from the rule of law. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited Angola last February, but failed to mention any action Washington will take to recover Angola's assets.
Mr. Powers, the U.S. is clearly complicit in the extensive and indiscriminate looting of Angola by the Dos Santos family, yet Washington claims to fight corruption. Now, what's your take on these double standards?
Washington only fights corruption when it's in their best interest. If they have an alliance with, particularly the Dos Santos family, they're going to look the other way. It's like this in many other countries. Now, maybe later on, they may go and collect like they've done in Nigeria, where they've, taken assets and returned them back to the governments of countries where presidents had stolen money. But the U.S. In general is, when it comes to foreign policy and their influence and who they work with, they tend to give a blind eye when it's in their own interest, and then they use it against them when they have to turn against them or use it against them to benefit U.S. policy.
Thanks, and stay tuned for more.
Meanwhile, Portugal has ordered the seizure of dozens of bank accounts belonging to Isabel dos Santos. During a state visit by Germany's Angela Merkel, Angolan President João Lourenço said his government was fighting to recover assets taken illegally from the country, and it sought overseas assistance. Last December, Angola's Justice Minister said his country had managed to recover $3 billion stolen from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. The minister did not give specific details about how the money was stolen. The Angolan government appears resolute in erasing negative influence of the now infamous Dos Santos family and recover lost assets. Will the Angolan government be able to recover the stolen assets mostly stashed in Western countries?
It's a complicated answer. It really depends how they shelled it. You know, there are all these shell companies in the islands and tax havens where everything's hidden. Depends on the paper trail. It is possible. I mean, in the case of what they've done with former presidents, like say Nigeria, they have recovered stolen funds. But we'll see. Again, it really depends on how well they hid the money. I know that when the Panama Papers were released, I know Dos Santos family was mentioned in that. So it's interesting to see how much they really know and where the money is hidden.
Angola is sub-Saharan Africa's second biggest oil producer and is ranked 18th in terms of oil reserves globally. The country's proven natural gas reserves are also around 4.0 trillion cubic feet. This Southern African country produces at least 1.3 million barrels of oil per day, but it remains one of the poorest in the world. Now, Mr. Powell, despite its riches, Angola is a very underdeveloped country. Is the country facing the curse of oil that is now affecting many of oil-rich African countries?
Most of this money gets stolen, unfortunately, and if it's not stolen, it's not used properly. It does not reach the lowest of the population, the poor. So, is it a curse or is it corruption? I think it's more corruption. I don't think it's a curse because it's the mentality of stealing the wealth of the nation for the benefit of a very small few people, and until that changes, you won't see the development based off resources.
Cases of African dictators serving the interests of Western countries and presiding over the looting of the resources of their poor countries are common in Africa. This impunity is only possible through complicity by Western countries. Western financial institutions and real estate companies have assisted African ruling and business elite to loot their country's resources. No concrete steps have been taken to recover billions, if not trillions of dollars looted by African dictators and hidden in Western countries. Western powers and their media empires hoodwink the public by claiming to fight corruption and impunity, while their economies are propped up by cash stolen from African and other third-world countries. What can African countries do to recover billions, if not trillions of dollars looted by African dictators and hidden in Western countries?
It's a good question. I think the reality of it is that, again, there's so much secrecy in these offshore companies that many jurisdictions around the world where, you simply, including the United States, there's a lot of money. I mean, the U.S. is actually a bigger tax haven than Switzerland. So there's a lot of money out there. It's hard to answer. I think a lot of that money is gone.
African masses are now demanding accountability from their governments and insisting on the protection and recovery of the continent's stolen assets. Here at Africa Today, we will keep you posted on efforts to recover African assets stashed in Western countries. And on that note, we come to the end of this week's program. Thank you for joining us. From me, Mubarak Kenya, and my team, it's goodbye for now.